on this computer.
Yeah.
That worked.
Good morning, race fans. This is Denny Miller. Welcome to Indy 500 Yesteryear and Today with Speedway Insiders Paul Page, Bob Gates, and yours truly. And as always, this show is dedicated to the memory of Robin Miller. And do you think he was laughing his rear end off after the first episode did? Probably Miller, he probably would have thought it was very humorous and everything.
Yeah.
But we do want to thank everyone for the real positive comments that we were getting from that. I've heard, Bob, that you had to go out and buy a box of 12 Sharpies to sign all the autographs that you got because of that. But we do appreciate it. It's neat. And what we're trying to accomplish is have what is going on in IndyCar and the Indy 500 today, but we look for that rich history of what made Indy over the years, and it's a blend of both. And my God, this is going to be a fantastic show. It was just one of the most exciting road races I think I've ever watched in IndyCar over the weekend.
Yes.
And that will be our lead story. But before we do that, who had a chance, did either one of you get a chance to see the club that they did on Foyt, Al Unser, Rick Mears, and Castroneves?
Yeah.
Big shout out to Doug Bulls. He just did an excellent job as a moderator. He was asking just some perfect questions for that thing.
We don't want to shout out to him too much. He may be getting our job. He's so good at it.
Oh, I know, but I thought that was fantastic. And then with Al's death, that was the perfect thing. Either one of you, Bob, you want to comment on what you thought of that?
Yeah, I saw it, and I thought it was very well done. I like the informality of the guys just kind of chatting to each other. And to be honest, I was surprised to see Doug Bowles host it, and I thought he did a good job of asking the questions and prompting the guys, encouraging the guys. So I thought it was excellent. I'm sure they'll NBC will show it again, probably part of the pre-race as well.
I think you can get it streamed on Peacock now too. Yeah.
Okay, good.
But yeah, I thought it was cool. And Doug did one thing that a great interviewer does, and that was he listened to the question and would occasionally follow the question up. Too many times that you ask a question and then the interviewer is now looking at his card saying, what do I ask next? And he doesn't hear the answer. Right. I always wanted in an interview with somebody like that to, when I see that happening, say, tape, of course, saying, and I really think the next nuclear war is going to be good, and see if they pick up on it. But yeah, the one thing I want to know is what room was that shot in? Where was that? That was a beautiful room.
When I first saw it, it looked like the Stutz building.
You think?
The elevator and all on the Stutz building, and that building has been sold, but that looked like the empty room possibly where they had their old race car collection, the vintage cars. Now, there's probably a number of other old buildings in Indy, but that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, that Stutz building is cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I loved Foyt's comment that he wasn't good enough to drive for Penske, referencing all the others had a chance to and you would think do well with Penske and everything.
Sure.
No, I don't know. I see a personality conflict there.
Yes.
No, certainly not.
No, yes.
I did hear one time that Penske did offer Foyt a ride, and
really
they turned it down.
I haven't heard that, but talk about a conflict with Bobby Unser and Tom Sneva. What it would have been with Foyt and Penske.
Now, one other comment that I got to make, because I get overly emotional when it comes to Back Home Again in Indiana. That commercial, that 2-minute commercial that ran, that was the first time I had seen it.
Oh, really?
Over the weekend, and
that was good.
Oh, beyond good. And how they started out with Ilio humming Back Home Again in Indiana. I catch myself doing that constantly.
Mhm.
And I can go from Peter DiPaolo doing it to Peter Marshall doing it to Jim Neighbors doing it.
Can you do Phil Harris though?
Yes, I
Oh.
can, but I can't do, who was that? The Voices of Liberty or whatever that
Right,
Disney
right.
group was that one time. That was probably the worst rendition.
So when you do Phil Harris, do you do the slurred version or?
No, the Blue the Bear version. Jungle Book.
That's how Jim Neighbors got his job. Seriously, Phil showed up and he was slurring his words and they said, "Oh my goodness."
Love that Indiana. Love that.
Yeah. And neighbors had no idea what it was all about. They had to hand him a card and
Right.
boy, he did a great job.
Oh, and became an icon with it.
Yes, he did.
You know what I never could figure out that one year that Neighbors did a recording from Hawaii,
Mm-hmm.
and it went over well, and why they did not continue when he couldn't travel to do it out of Hawaii and went to the 37th and 38th. I think fans would have certainly embraced it like the other one.
Yeah, well,
Sure.
you know how, I mean, I'm a total traditionalist with the Speedway. I mean, when they change the color of the seat somewhere, I get upset, breaking tradition, shattering it. There were two things I always thought would have been cool. Jim Neighbors, you just keep playing it. He's immortal at the Speedway. It's his song. And I thought the same thing with Tom Carnegie. We had so many good tapes of Carnegie doing his play-by-play. I thought, well, in the modern world, you could put that all into a MIDI file and you could play back Tom Carnegie at different, you can actually type in what you want Tom to say.
Sure.
And now you got Tom as the immortal and forever PA announcer.
Right.
I don't think Calabro is going to be happy with that idea, but I'm
not.
probably going to have to answer it to him right now.
But Calabro is so good too. I mean, he is Tom Carnegie 20 years from now. I just think he's fantastic in the way he makes now the newer version of Indy that good. And Corneliuson is outstanding singing Back Home Again, Indy. I don't know, but I would imagine he is an annual fixture as long as he wants to do it.
Speaking though of traditions, we're going to lose the balloon thing,
Yeah. Hey, I heard that.
Was that a 1-year deal or is that?
No, they didn't do it. What, last year? Last year was the first year they didn't do it, and they've announced they're not going to do it, and it's all part of not choking a crow in New Hampshire or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I heard something over the weekend, a story around that over the weekend I thought was very interesting. Is last year, as Paul said, they did not have the balloon release, but someone outside the track released about 100 balloons.
Really?
Yes. And I can see more and more people getting involved in doing that. And we might have more balloons than we've ever.
It started with you, Bob Gates, let's fill the air with, maybe every fan can release their own balloon and there's 300,000 balloons.
Yeah, bring your own.
Right.
BYOB, that's where the new version of BYOB is. Well, we had a race over the weekend.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness.
I think that was about as exciting. It was maybe because it was at the Speedway too, but the contrast between the backstretch being dry and the main straightaway being wet, I really don't remember that happening all that often. But it was fantastic for those not being or alert. But Colton Herta won it. I think he establishes himself as the front runner of this Bay. Last year started second. He could very well do a Simon Pagenaud and
double up.
Triple up, and they'll give him a broom to sweep the bricks again. So Paul, what was your take on this Saturday in the event?
Well, I'm like you. I think it's one of the best races I've ever seen, especially since, as you all know, I'm into tactics and strategies and trying to follow those throughout that race. And I felt really good when at the end of the race, they were talking to some of the drivers and saying, well, what was your race plan there? And what was your strategy? And he said, we had nothing. You know, they all said that. I have no idea what we were doing at the end.
Right.
I think one of the things that really got them, just looking at strategy, was a lot of people had forgotten about the 2-hour rule. And when that suddenly popped up, as you can well imagine, that changed everything in terms of, you know, where you're going with well, like fuel loads,
Right.
as an example.
Yeah.
Forget the tires, fuel loads. And I think there are at least 5 teams that I can account for that accidentally put a full load in after they were in the 18-minute count. So of them, all of those involved were like heavy by 9 or 10 pounds. That they could have not had in the race car, but then in the rain, I'm not so sure. Maybe making the car heavier helps. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, it was such a great mix. I agree with Paul and you as well, Denny. Great race. It's such a great mix of really good hard driving and strategy.
Yeah,
You know, with the weather and trying to determine the tire you wanted. And at one point, I think it was Herta said, "I'm not saving fuel." He was,
yeah.
you know, he had quite a bit of aggression about him, and
Right.
him and Pato Award both
Right.
made some very aggressive passes and
Oh, yeah.
moves during
How
that
about
race.
how about the 4-wheel drift to beat them all?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Now that, he saved that as, you know, you had to light an extra candle in church for that one.
Yeah, yeah. And you look at the onboard camera of that when you
Oh.
see how really fast his hands are.
Yeah.
And I mean,
He had the car.
great.
He had it all over in full lock.
Yeah, he was in full lock to the left
Yeah.
at one point that he had to bring his right hand up and over the wheel so he could pull it back around. I mean, that's
And
that's the way over there.
he was in that drift for several seconds too.
Yeah,
It wasn't
yeah.
just you know, just an instantaneous thing.
Yeah,
It was incredible.
it was.
Who surprised you in the race? My pick was, and I really am impressed with this young kid, that a yacht that
Yeah.
Vukovitz is having. They're more, if they grabbed Grosjean up like they did, I would imagine some bigger teams may come calling for him.
Yeah, he was of course the center of a number of things, but he was in there, and I guess that's the point. You stick your nose in there and you race with him. So
Yeah.
the thing I don't understand what's going on with Grosjean. He suddenly seems to be like irritated again.
Yeah.
And I know that behind the scenes he's kind of that way, but I don't understand why here in his second year and he's doing so good that he seems to. I don't know. I don't want to demean him, as I really like what he does, but he seems to be a little grumpy.
Yeah.
Do you see
he
that,
does.
Bob?
And yes, and I don't know if part of that is his expectations are much higher this year, if not from the team and others, from himself.
Right.
You know, he's with one of the top teams now. He might feel like he should have won a race already.
Yeah.
And it's tough to win these races in the IndyCar series. Competition is so close,
Yep.
so tight, and then like with any race, there's so many things that can happen in pit stops and weather conditions or whatever the case might be. So it might be his own expectations that are making him a little more tense.
Well, our buddy Robin would certainly love the Ray Hall Grosjean. He wanted more of that.
He would have stirred that up so much.
But
And I don't know, they probably are kind of glad that that's happening behind the scenes or something, maybe.
You know what else I saw? I didn't know they were into this yet, but the light system that they use for the road course, the system used to be done by Delphi, but then they ran out of transmitters on a frequency or something. So this is a new group doing them. And so like on the shot down the front stretch from turn 1, you could see one of the lights with the FCY on it, which is telling them full course yellow. And of course, the lights are highly visible. I mean,
Yes.
they really show up. So That's a
Yes.
great system. And
Right.
there is so much they can do with it. I mean, it doesn't have to be just a simple light system. They can do
Right.
all kinds of other things like information with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I saw that full course yellow at CY myself, so that tells me that they can put other messages
Yep.
up there. They have
Exactly.
the ability to do that. Certainly more visible than a flag, especially again in the type of conditions they had Saturday.
Do you think it would have been a dry day? Herta could have won starting from 14th?
Yeah.
Yeah, anything's possible. Of course, it would have fallen. They did a great bit of pit strategy right at the beginning.
Right,
And
and
they
that
jerked
was-
him in early
right.
and changed tires. And of course,
Well, yeah, how he was
he went
snaking
from,
along before the temperature got in. That was a
yeah,
tribute to himself.
yeah,
It was a very, very entertaining day.
There
very much so.
there was also something from Firestone that really got my attention, and that was the Reds were very grippy. That even in the rain, they would grab a hold of the concrete and not let go. And so,
right.
and that's why I think a lot of guys felt comfortable trying to stay on them.
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting with the tires. Again, towards the end of the race, they were on yellow, went green. Award was in second and went so deep down in that turn one and still made the turn.
Exactly.
Yet he spun on a caution.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting observation about the tires.
If it wasn't a timed race, would there have been a different outcome, do you feel?
No,
I don't think so.
I think Curta had the field. Curta had the field the whole day.
Yeah,
There was a point
in the dry. He was, he got up to a 6-7 second lead there at one point.
Yeah.
Once he got to the front, it seemed like he had them all covered.
Yeah, and the last couple of laps, he was pulling away. I mean,
Yes.
second place was 4 to 5 seconds behind and just kept
Right.
going further backwards. So maybe some people are thinking, well, it's better to be second or third than to crash.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, Herta was flying.
Yeah. This race, of course, that really doesn't have anything to do with the 500 as far as what you learn and that type of thing.
Right.
But I do think it gives a team and the driver maybe some confidence and momentum
Yeah.
going into the rest of the month of May and the 500. And like I said, it just seemed like Herta, you could tell in the radio transmissions and the way he was driving, he just said, "This is mine, I'm taking it."
Yeah.
That kind of attitude.
I certainly see it as a possible Simon Pagenaud type of scenario for Herta this year.
Could be.
Or even Will Power, didn't he win the Grand Prix and then won Indy in 2018? I think so.
Right.
One thing I'm going to look into deeper when I get out to the track. The way McLaughlin out accelerated Colton on the pit exit.
Yes.
They hit the line together. And at first I thought, did Colton just falter on that? Or is there a different setup in the way Penske sets up their lowest gear? But he definitely pulled away from him.
Mhm.
Right.
Paid for it later, but
Yeah. Well, and I did hear her say on the radio transmission is that, and I don't know who he's referring to, but a Chevy engine, that he's pulling me on the straights. He's faster than me on the straights. I heard him say that, or words to that effect. So it seemed like Chevy's got a little more straight line pace at this point, maybe.
Yeah.
But who knows? It's a road course.
right. It has
So
nothing to do with the Indy 500.
Right.
What's your big take out of this weekend, Bob, from that race?
Well, again, I've mentioned a couple of times already the aggressive, I think, attitude, take charge attitude of Colton Herta. I think he really wants that. You mentioned him. I was impressed with him as well. I think he ended up finishing 10th or something like that, but ran with the front most of the day, and just great, for that one car team and a young driver. So Connor Daly, I can't not mention Connor Daly.
Oh yeah.
And going back to what Paul said earlier in the interviews later, Connor started fourth, fell way back, maybe the 20th, and
Yeah.
came back to finish fourth. And they asked him afterwards, how did that happen? How'd you do it? I don't know. That's the response. I don't know how it happened.
There was that one other good moment too on the radio between Brian Herta and Colton Herta, in which there was an interchange about the weather, like when is it going to come? And finally Colton said to them, says, well, you're the weather guys, or something to that effect. You tell them. They were asking Colton, what's the rain doing? You know, and you're the weather guys.
Oh,
How about you, Paul? What's your top take out of the race Saturday?
Well, the changing of the guard again. We started seeing at the end of last year. Well, we started to see it with our new champion, but you know, you look at a guy like Dixon and people who are normally really there, they're beginning to fade a bit, and these kids are fearless. You know, they'll put a car anywhere you want it. It's amazing some of the driving they do, and they're taking over. They're doing it pretty quickly now, and I like that. I really felt bad for Montoya because he drove a great race and then ends up crashing, and that I was hoping he'd finish that up. I'm always glad when I see him back because he's bubbly. He's a fun guy.
Right.
I think Montoya will do very good this May. He was quite content, even though he was running 32nd in that open test, that he was running a full fuel loads, and very pleased how his car was handling. And I guess it wouldn't surprise me if Castroneves could win his fourth, that Montoya could win his third. And that was just a beautiful paint job, that Lucas Oil car that he had. I think that was the best looking of the paint jobs I've ever seen that Lucas Oil was connected with.
Can you see that? Can you see that place if Castroneves wins his fifth? I mean, it's going to be crazy.
Oh gosh.
And I'd love it. I'd love that.
Yeah. It adds some buzz and excitement to the whole thing.
We really need to plant the seed if he does win the fifth. Instead of climbing the fifth, he climbs the pagoda or something.
Yeah. Throw a rope out for him.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, one big headline that came out of that, the club, was that AJ Foyt told Castroneves there's no reason he couldn't win a fifth.
Yeah.
Records are made to be broken. So,
Yeah.
But you know what was not mentioned, and you know, this drive for five, which I think is just fantastic, PR type of movement. AJ wins his fourth in 1977, and he runs clear through 1992. Was there in 93, and he should have made the race then. And you didn't hear that buzz, will Foyt win his fifth like you're doing Castroneves.
Yeah, also with Castroneves, he got his fourth the quickest of all four of those guys.
yes,
So I think that also tells us he's really capable of doing it.
right. Yep. He's still fired up. He's still hungry.
Well, I mean, Mears, his comment that he was losing the interest, the edge was gone. And because I talked to Rick, I think a couple of years ago at one of the Hall of Fame dinners, and I said, you know, in 93, Fittipaldi wins, and 94, Al Jr. wins. That very easily could have been your fifth in the Penske car, and it was, aw shucks, kind of, you know, he didn't matter to him. He was content where he was, but very realistically, he, with the strength of Penske in those 2 years, Mears very easily would have been a five-time winner. He was so good here. Been interesting how Mears would have done in a non-Penske car.
Good question. I mean,
and I think in a way that Castroneves winning and Meyer Shank an automobile, you know, that it just wasn't a Penske car that he won in.
Yeah.
Right.
So
But
we left our last episode talking about the four-time winners, and we were talking AJ Foyt. all four winners have something kind of in common. They were almost gifted one of their wins. AJ Foyt in 67, Parnelli Jones in the Turbine dominated that race.
Right.
Al Unser, his last one in 87. Well, he shouldn't even been in the race, had an option for Danny Ongaias's crash, but Mario dominated that. Then Guerrero had a lap lead and kills his engine in the pits. Rick Mears, his first win, Bobby Unser had that one until late in the race. And then Castroneves, the very unlikely 2002 winning that. And if that race would have gone full green, he would have ran out of fuel. And
That's
Paul
what I
Tracy
heard.
would have won.
Yeah.
I think that he ran out, I think, on the victory lap, if the information is correct.
Yeah.
So with those, each of those four gifts, we'll look at Foyt's gift. And I love the 1967 race and how Parnelli dominated that in the Turbine, and the love-hate relationship of the fans for the Turbine because of the sound that it makes.
Right.
Versus.
You remember with a Turbine, you could hear the brakes, and when they had the little air brake pop up on the back, you could hear that, and you could hear, you can hear it with a regular car, but you could hear it clack over the bricks, and I mean the lack of an engine noise let you know a lot of things that you never heard before.
Right. Yeah. Certainly a different sound.
Yeah.
What would have happened had they left regulations in place with that 67 Turbine? Would the field have been all Turbine race cars in 2 to 3 years?
I think so, merely because that was a Pratt and Whitney CJ4, I forget, but it was a Pratt and Whitney,
Right.
Small turbine, tiny turbine. It didn't need maintenance for the longest period of time, so it was nothing to maintain. It wasn't all that expensive, especially when you compare it to the thoroughbred racing engines. So it would have been a logical move for the owners to move to that. And I guess I point out to Unlimited Hydroplanes moving over there because they didn't have any engines, and I don't think that helped them all that much, but if at all. So I'm kind of glad it didn't happen, though. I've got some great tape with Andy standing by the car as they started, and it actually was like a pilot's routine, all right, this, now this, and you'd hear it spin up to full. Yay!
Did you ever hear the rumor that they didn't want to win and SCP got more exposure by them dropping out?
I'm not buying
laps
that.
ago.
No, me.
That bristles Parnelli to this day and everything.
Yeah. Well, just think of the name Granatelli and tell me that. Whatever his relationship was with STP, I don't think it was in his heart to say, "Oh yeah, we'll go."
No,
he's not doing that.
No. It generated a lot of publicity, but it had already generated a lot of publicity with Johnny Carson crying out loud, driving the car around the speedway. So no, I don't. I'm like Paul. I don't buy that.
Well,
not at Indy. I might buy that anywhere else, but not at Indy.
Not Indy.
I don't really buy it anywhere else.
Parnelli so dominated, so that was his race. But then Foyt had the good fortune on the last lap. What do you remember about that? Probably that's most, well, other than maybe J.R. Hillbrand's last lap in 2011. But prior to that, that had to have been the most exciting finish ever. Do you recall that day, Bob? Out of turn 4, Foyt coming out of.
Yeah, and it takes, among other things, it takes some luck to win the Indianapolis 500. Everything has to go your way. I thought it was interesting, and I'd heard him say it before, and he said it again on the program the other day, the club, that he anticipated something happening as he was coming out of 3 and going into 4. And I don't know if it just, that racer's intuition or that racer's caution. You start hearing, you get towards the end of the 500, you start hearing all types of things that you think are going wrong. But I thought that was interesting. He anticipated something happening and probably began to slow down or back off a little bit, as he went into 4 and came out. So that might have helped him get through it as well.
Probably saw something that he really didn't know he saw.
Yeah.
Because their eyes are so
exactly.
good.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Good
And then
point.
Tom Carnegie's call over the PA, where's Foyt? Where's Foyt?
Yes.
It's just classic Tom Carnegie.
It certainly
I
added
guess
to
on
the drama.
TV, McKay was doing a similar analysis there, but just there's the case when it's your day, it's your day. And
Right.
But there's a story in that with AVC. There's a lot of good stories I could tell you about the early days with AVC, but I might.
And that's what's going to be great about this show. So our viewers tune in week after week, and you're going to hear a lot of Paul Page type of stories like that. Yes.
So what that was in those days, that race, for example, shot in film, and then as soon as the race was actually before the race was over, the editors started putting the race together for playback that evening. And so on that crash, they thought they needed some more than they actually had in terms of audio. They didn't have really good audio coverage, and they needed tire skidding sounds, which they had on some reel somewhere. And they wanted also the crash sounds. So they, and I'd seen this done elsewhere. They went out and threw a garbage can up against the wall and recorded that. That was the crash.
And enhanced the sound. Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you were there, and your first year, Paul, was probably the greatest historic year ever.
Yeah.
As far as a race, and you got to call it. You got to see the first four-time winner.
Yeah.
AJ Foyt. You got to see the first
Female.
female.
Right.
You saw Tom Sneva be the first 200. What was that like? I'm more, I guess I'm saying from now the race is just now over. You saw that history. How does Paul Page and the rest of the crew celebrate the rest of the day and the evening and what followed?
Well, I think for all of us, especially on that day, everybody was just exhausted because it had been a rough month. What with the passing of Sid Collins just before the activity began at the track, and just figuring out doing that particular race and knowing that all of those little factors were in there and how you wanted to wind them in and out, and making sure that you did. That was one thing that I wanted to make sure I had done, was gotten all of the stories in. And then, of course, when Gordon Johncock breaks a crankshaft coming off of 4, and Foyt comes screaming down, now you know it's a Foyt race. And it probably took me 20, 30 seconds to figure out, whoa, this could be a first four-time winner. So yeah, it was almost all of the races. And I think all of us are pretty much exhausted at the end of the day. And a lot, like I'm one of those guys, you could ask me the day after who won the race, and sometimes I can't remember because my brain's still trying to, it's still spun up the other way. Right. Other than, I was happy the month was over, and I was happy that it went well. And I was hoping that I put on a good enough performance that I would be invited back. So.
And you soon got those kind of accolades coming your way. Tell us about some of the post-race commentary that they were sending to you, Paul.
Well, those are the days, number one, that we you didn't have texting or email, so we got regular snail mail, and a lot of it very complimentary. And in fact, if there was a bad one, they hid it from me. But the reaction that, of course, had the greatest effect was Mr. Hallman, who I saw several days later. And he came up and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "I hear you did a great job. Thank you very much." So that, that meant a lot too. And he didn't say, "Thank you very much, we'll see you next year." That came a little while later, but Mr. Hallman to me is just such an incredibly special person, and to have that personal interchange with him. There's also a good photograph of Mr. Hallman down at the pit exit. And he knows where the race is going, but he's standing there with one of our engineers, and the engineer has put a headset, a listen-only headset on him. And Tony's like this, and he's smiling as he's listening to the race on the radio. So, and remember him going around the track at the end of that day with AJ. That was.
Did he ever ride around with any other race winner, or was that the first time that he took that?
Bob would be a better guy.
Yeah, as far as I know, that was the first and only, of course, the only time that he went around with the winner.
No.
Normally it was just a winner and the wife, or maybe the family, if there was some children involved, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, I'm interested in your driver expert. That year, your first year, was Freddie Agabation.
Oh yeah,
colorful person.
Well,
what story or two do you have about him and that one and only working with him on radio?
Well, number one, Freddie was just a special person, the pole sitter with the Cummins diesel. And he was very helpful before the race, especially giving me advice from his point of view. And it was important to know. And during the race, he'd just pick up on anything. And he had this marvelous gravelly voice, which was quickly identifiable. And he was funny. And the only problem that we had was at one point he's talking about a situation at another track that ended up in a fatality. It wasn't an Indy car type of situation, or it would have been Champ Car those days. It wasn't that, but he was on his way to getting graphic, is the best way I can put it. And I finally put my hand on his arm and I gave him the look, and he quieted down right away. But at one point we were afraid, because he was going toward something like, and he smashed his head on the wall kind of thing. I didn't want to hear that. So, but other than that slight moment, he was fun. He was off. And
I don't think you probably could have had a better driver analysis.
No, absolutely.
To open your first year. And Bob, for people who do not know, you wrote the book on Bill Vukovitz. And Bill Vukovitz and Freddie Agabation kind of have a history from 1952. What do you recall about Vuki and the Agabation record?
Well, of course, Freddie put the Cummins diesel on the pole and set some track records doing that, and got a lot of acclaim and recognition, of course, for that, as the pole winner did back in those days. But Vukovitz had shown up in 1952, of course, with the first Indianapolis type roadster, and the sleeker, more smooth looking, the engine laid down for better center of gravity, balance, and those types of things. But it was a new car, and they spent most of the month leading up to the first weekend of qualifying trying to get the car to work and trying to get it straightened out. They didn't start building that car until March of that year, and had to have it ready for the month of May. So when they did get it working really good, it was fast. And then Vukovitz went out and broke Freddie's track record in qualifying. So that was a connection there. But of course, then Chet Miller in the Novi again broke the track record on whether it was the same day or the following day, I don't remember. But kind of an unusual year to have the track record set and then broken that many times on other than pole day.
And Agabation wins his pole in 52 in the Cumming diesel. He lost it 2 years prior in kind of a heartbreak when a rookie by the name of Walt Faulkner driving
Yes.
for JC Agajanian. The story goes his throttle stuck, and that helped him get the pole. I think they were doing a live interview with Freddie, and when that run was made. But he got his pole. It's like Takuma Sato, he finally got his Indy after giving one away. Maybe there's hope for J.R. Hillbrand. Yeah. By mentioning Hillbrand, isn't that a very patriotic paint job that he has on this year's car?
Yeah, I've seen that.
That
Very
is
striking.
very striking. So, Paul, you had that very successful first year. What immediately, or how did it start to go and plan for 1978? And
I was at the Hoosier 100 later that year, and Tony and Joe Cloutier were there, and Mr. Cloutier said, come over here a second. And generally, you had to remember that part of Cloutier's assignments in those days was he was the hatchet man. And so when he called you over, you're like, oh, I'm in serious trouble. And Tony was kind of standing behind a pillar. This was on the stage at the Indiana State Fairgrounds, and Tony reiterated that I had done a fine job. They were proud of me, and they'd like me to keep doing it. So and so I just passed out right there. I can't even begin to tell you what it felt like to know that, because I'd been pretty apprehensive through the summer on what might happen, but that was the whole thing about the way that came about and how people helped me and treated me and gave me advice was an amazing time.
Yeah.
How would you compare and contrast your style to Sid Collins' style?
We're entirely different. Sid's is classy and good. Mine, not necessarily so. Now, Sid, he had a system, and he invented that whole thing. That radio network shouldn't really have happened back in 52, and especially in the ensuing years, because the equipment needed in those days just to get lines out to the turns so they could operate required an engineer as well as an announcer. And we didn't have satellites at that time. So every individual station had to be connected to AT&T long lines. And, that was a process. So Sid solved that by going to all the other radio stations in the city and saying, hey, let's do this as a combined deal. So that's why you had announcers from different stations. You also had engineering equipment from different stations. So that got it done. Now, the way Sid dealt with it, he understood the need for celebrity at that time. So if he had a celebrity in the area, and Dinah Shore might be a good example of that, then he used that person and got him up in the booth. And he did that with a number of stars at the time. And his method, the race was essentially always in past tense, just because of the nature of the communication system. If there was a crash in turn one, and Mike Ahern would then have to contact over a second circuit Jack Morrow, who was the producer standing next to Sid, and say, we've got a crash in turn one. I might even say, it's so-and-so. And then Jack would write that on a card and hand it to Sid. So you lost, 30 seconds, maybe as much as a minute sometimes going out there. So you never had a live in-happening situation. So I changed that where we could all talk to one another. All the announcers and I would button, you just push it and you're off the air. And since you have a lot of nice racing sounds in the background, nobody really notices that. And you can tell them what to do. And then in reverse, they got a crash. They just hit yellow, turn one. And I say, let's go to turn one. And more often than not, the accident is still in progress when we get there. So that's some of the things I really wanted to do, is get it in real time. And I, like many people at that time, had kind of gotten tired of the celebrities. Again, in his day, the race running slow, especially under a yellow, he needed that. He needed to do those interviews. We didn't need it. And so, and Freddie prompted me on this, Freddie Agavation, and we locked the door of the booth. And I mostly was looking out the front of the booth, but I do remember one time when a notable star came up at the back of the booth, and he standing there and giving me a wave, and I doors locked.
So 1978 was the first year that they put all 4 laps together and had a 200-mile-an-hour average with Tom Sneva winning his second pole. They also had a all front row 200-mile-an-hour average. What do you remember about that first weekend, Bob, getting rained out?
Well,
Mario very could have well sat on the pole had it been the first weekend, because he was
right.
fastest.
Well, rain at the racetrack, except on Saturday, is always this past Saturday is always a terrible thing, and it's just kind of a letdown. Especially from the fans' point of view, and I'm sure the competitors at that time as well. You're all pumped up for pole day, and it's, again, back then it was so very important, to win the pole position, not only for a good starting position, but for all the PR that went with it. Whoever won the pole position at the Indianapolis 500 at one time had as much notoriety as a winner of the 500, and then certainly more than the winner of any other race. People today are long remembered for winning the poles and sitting on the front row. Jack McGrath is one that comes to mind, for instance. Never won the 500, but very well known for winning the pole, sitting on the front row. Duke Nalen with the Novi is another one that people still talk about today, from the 1940s. So I think, from the fans' point of view, it was a letdown. You get pumped up to go to the first day of qualifying, pole day. Back then, the crowds rivaled race day for attendance. So you just lost all that.
Not only did we lose the first day, we lost the second day. The whole weekend was rained out.
Yeah.
And it was compounded because Mario was running Formula One and had to leave to go to race in the Belgium Grand Prix, which he did win.
Right.
And then they had the dilemma. He had the fastest car. He was driving for Penske. Actually, Sneva had not posted as fast of speeds as Mario did.
Right.
And then they had to find a alternative driver. Paul, were you surprised when they gave that qualifying opportunity to Mike Hiss?
Yeah. Mike Hiss was a pretty good buddy. If for no other reason than his car was called, well, it wasn't called, but it was part of Page Racing. Nothing to do with me, but Mike and I got along really well. In fact, I conned him into putting one of our recorders in the cockpit with him during a practice so we could get noises. But I guess the decision was he's a competent driver. He could get that car in the field with no trouble whatsoever. And there were others that might have done it, but might have not. You wouldn't have had the confidence that he would not try to show off. They just might. Bob, help me. Is that the Jigger Soroy qualification weekend?
No, that was
69 in the
69.
Back in the
Okay.
60s.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll have to deal with
Right.
that.
Oh, we definitely, that Jigger Soroy story was just fantastic. And because of that, for those who don't know, Jigger drew a high number. He was the first to go out. and it rained all day. And they finally went out and took 3 laps, I think around 162, and everyone thought it was going to take 165 to make the race. Bob Igman was I believe the chief mechanic for that car, and they go yellow, and then Arnie Knepper was next to go, and before he could leave, it rained, and therefore there was no qualifying that day. But had they taken that green, the checkered flag, Jigger Soroy would have sat on the pole at a speed of 162 mile an hour.
Yeah.
Finkler told me that he may very well have put him 33rd as opposed to letting him start on the pole.
Yeah.
Whether that was a fledgling young reporter back then, he just blowing me smoke or something, but he had the authority to do that apparently.
Great story. And again, that just emphasizes what we've been talking about, the importance of pole day at that time. Jigger Soroy is remembered by many today for not getting the pole position when he had a chance. So
Jigger's at the track every year to this day. And we give an award to a bad luck driver in his name every year.
Right.
It's one of those more quiet awards, but it's there.
One of the nicest, most gracious, humble individuals you could ever meet.
Yep.
Can you remember in that time frame, we'd get there at 4 in the morning and get in line for 2 hours to be positioned to do that stampede up to the penthouse and try to get the front row. And after a while, they would rope it off. And if you were up there and you went down, you would not get back to the penthouse again. And it had, what'd you say, upwards of 200,000 or so people for pole day. And the height of that time frame, that Mario Foyt era, it was just fascinating. And each year with Tom Carnegie just helped create that interest with that to-do track record, and people would just eat that up. To this day, you could just watch the replays of that, and it's exciting to hear Carnegie say that. But anyway, 78 was all front row. Al Unser qualified in the middle of the second row in a Jim Hall car. And I don't think hardly anyone would have given him a nod as a race favorite that year. And he wins, and he somewhat dominates. Paul, from your perspective, how surprised were you on that?
I was pretty surprised because of the mid-pack start. At that time, we used to, you'd look at the front 3 rows and maybe only the front 2 and pretty much assume, though there were a number of cases where the win didn't come from that. But my first doing a play-by-play call and that happening impressed me. There's one of the other things I really remember about that race. We in the booth lost track of the scoring. And the way we confirmed scoring in those days, we didn't have computers or anything. We had John DeCamp, who would run downstairs to the second floor of the control tower where the scoring was and confirm it and then run back up. And so I said, get down there because we're not sure. It was after a series of stops and things got convoluted. And he ran down, he came back up and he goes, they don't know either. So I asked my pit reporters, I said, well, a couple of you or one of you at least go to one of the teams and ask them what position they're in. So, maybe we can figure it out. Well, of course we finally did, but that was what was special, if I can use that word.
Well, your first 2 years, you got to call the first 4-time winner, and then you got to call a 3-time winner in your second race. Then Al wins the Triple Crown at Pocono and also the Ontario Motor Speedway in a car that wasn't all that good.
No.
You've heard that Rutherford story about driving the car. And
With the-
how bad it was?
Oh, yeah. Al had a number of times. Al was a sandbagger. And he had to have a perfect car to do well, was what all of us believed, and pretty much what he proved out time and time. But that car he complained about, and nobody would listen to him. So Johnny Rutherford took that car and was like 4 years ago over at one of the events in England, one of the Cours d'Elegance things where they also run a couple of the cars. So he drove that car, and he called me when he got back, and he said, that was going over there and being part of that and all those great cars was fun. He said, but that car did not handle at all. And it was in the configuration that it last raced in. And he said, he called Al and told him, he says, what was wrong with the car? What did they do wrong that it couldn't handle? He said, I kept telling people it didn't handle well. Nobody would believe me because I'm winning races with it. So.
Right. He complained about that car, and you asked Paul if he was surprised. I think Al was surprised.
Yeah.
He won that race, although he did qualify fifth, but he just was not happy with the car at all. And he was telling me once in a conversation that about that race, and he said it started, and he said, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. And he said somebody at one point early in the race came on the radio and said, Al, you're about to get lapped. I don't know if it was on Gaius at that point or Sneva, but said you're about to get lapped. And Al said in that voice that I won't try to imitate, that kind of a humble New Mexico draw of his, golly, I better get going. He says this to himself. And it got going and ended up leading over 100 laps of that race to win it. So, yeah. And Denny, you mentioned him winning the Triple Crown, but he also won the 500-miler at Ontario the season before. So he won 4 consecutive 500-mile races those 2 years. So it's incredible.
How much did that bother Bobby that Al was winning like that? Paul, you knew Bobby.
I'm sure he was rooting for his brother.
Mhm.
Yeah. No. No.
I know he was emotional. I was watching the broadcast, by then in 87. Right. I know he's very proud of his of his brother, and sounded on the verge of being emotional.
Well, that was, the old Germanic style family where Bobby, because he was the eldest, therefore always considered himself in charge of everything. And pretty much the others listened to him because he knew what he's talking about in a lot of ways, but also typical of a family. They'd get to sometimes and they'd hate each other, for whatever reason. And then they'd patch up. And so anytime that Al was doing really well, and especially if Bobby wasn't, that would have been a deal. If Bobby had kind of been in the fight, might not have been as bad, except of course Al wouldn't have moved over. But I think on that one, Bobby, like we saw later on he was excited about the rest of the family doing well.
Yeah.
Behind you, Bobby, you have that absolutely beautiful photo of Al Unser's first win in 1970. He dominated that race like few drivers did. And then he comes back in 1971 and wins a second time in a little lesser impressive way. I want to get your comparison between Vuki's dominance in 53 and his winning in 54, but a non-dominant ride. And you see the similarities between Al's domination in 70 and far less so in 71.
Yeah, I think Al led 190 laps when he won in 1970. Vukovitz led 195 when he won in 1953 for his first win. So there's, very similar there. And then the next year in both counts, they didn't have quite the domination, didn't have quite the good of equipment as they had before, a year before, for a lot of reasons. But I think it just goes back to emphasize, to win Indy, it's a combination of talent. You have to have a very talented driver, at least an okay car, and some luck involved in that as well. It's interesting today when we think about all the computer generated data that the team engineers are looking at throughout the race. In 1954, when Vuki won, he made one less pit stop than most of the other contenders. And that's because Stu Hillbrand, who developed fuel injection for race cars, was setting in their pits with a slide rule calculating the fuel mileage. And he told Jim Travers, who was the head of the team, we don't need to stop. We don't need to make that last stop. We got enough fuel. And Travers kept asking him, are you sure? And he'd do his thing with the slide rule again. Yep, we got enough. And sure enough, they did. So, it takes the equipment, it takes a good team, it takes racing has always been and remains very much a team sport. And it takes that bit of luck as well.
When you wrote your book about Vukovitz, did you comment about Jimmy Bryan finishing second and how he just got all beat up in that final second half of the race? I'll let you reminisce about how tough Bryan was and how he persevered to finish second.
Yeah, he was one tough driver, that's for sure, and a big guy, a good sized guy, probably Foyt's size, maybe bigger than Foyt, muscular, the big shoulders, the big arms. And the car he was driving in 54, Dean Van Line Special, was the old style championship dirt car. And Vukovitz had the newer type Watson Roadster. But things started breaking on the car. The shocks went out, and he was so beat up after the race that here's tough Jimmy Bryan. They rolled the car back into the garage area. They had to help him out of the car. When he did, he collapsed on the floor, and he said, the SOB beat me. That was his words. He was beat up so bad, he missed the Milwaukee race the following weekend. Vukovitz, by the way, drove the car in Bryan's place, put it on the pole, and ended up leading a big part of the race until some problems with the steering, ironically, caused him to have to drop out.
Well, 71, when Al wins his second, they had that most unusual start with the pace car crash, and the local Dodge dealer named Eldon Palmer, forever going down in Speedway history for that one incident. Paul, what do you recall about that? There's a couple of theories that what caused that crash. What have you heard about? And I'll let you, for the viewers who might not know, kind of set the stage on that as well.
Yeah, well, they had in that particular year, the Speedway had trouble. It was a time when they tried to have a different manufacturer every year, and that year they had a little trouble, and the deal came together late. And the only way the deal worked out was if Eldon Palmer, who owned a Dodge dealership, would do all the processing on the cars and everything, and prepare them, not just the pace car, but also prepare the VIP cars and everything that were given out to the 500 festival people and the like every year. And in return, he was going to get to drive the pace car. And so he had John Glenn and Chris Schenkel and himself in the pace car. And he'd practiced it. He was a studious kind of guy. I mean, he didn't just let things happen and not be prepared.
Right.
And one of the stories then goes this way, that there were some stakes put in the ground on the inside of the pit wall with the track. And that Eldon, as he came down the pits, those stakes were gone. And that's true because I talked to the guy just recently who pulled all those stakes out. So he had no reference point for the braking. And so he braked late. In result of that is he locked the brakes. He hit a speedway patrolman, one of the yellow shirts, blue shirts, I think in those days. And then hit a flatbed truck, was pulled across the exit of the pits, and it had a set of bleachers on it for all the photographers so they could get a ground view shot of the start itself. And it went under that. Now, the good news was nobody was injured in the car, though Schenkel was very shaken up, and he couldn't really perform that day. But that's one story. Another possibility.
There's a better one too.
Yeah, well, let me just go back and discuss injuries. There were some injuries in the bleachers because it, pitched everything forward. And one of the guys was a guy named Alvarez, and he was pretty seriously injured. He went to the hospital for quite some time, and his wife would come and was with him almost all the time. That is until his wife from his home country of Venezuela shows up. There were moments, I guess, on that one. Okay, so that's the wooden stake theory. My theory, and I think most people go with that it was removed. My theory is more so, I think that was a time when the pace car took the field all the way to the start line. And the big deal for the pace car was to have that shot of it alongside the front row of the field as they take the green. And I have a feeling that Eldon just looked over, he wanted to watch the start of the race. and when he looked back, it was a little further down the track than he anticipated. Right. So that's I know Eldon, I knew him, he's passed away. He's happened to be a 33rd degree Mason, and I'm involved in Freemasons, and so I had an opportunity to see him quite a bit before he passed, and he's still lively. Yeah.
Al never got that pace car. The winner gets the pace car.
Yeah, that one went away. As we're getting close to the end of the show here, and I think something's going on out at the track this weekend, which would be qualifying.
Yes.
And I just wanted to tell you a theory that I have about qualifying. As you said earlier, that day drew a massive crowd. 160,000 would not be a wrong number to pick for any of the qualifying days. In fact, there's a story of David Hobbs when he first arrived at the Speedway, and when he walked out for qualifying that morning, and he looked up and around, and he was like, "My God!" And he said, "This is more crowd than we get for Formula One races." So, we at that time, you didn't really have a good idea who was going to get the pole. I mean, there was a lot of questions there. I think we in television may have ruined it in part because we got into that predicting the speed of the car. And in fact, the system was so good that it could tell you where the guy was going to go into the field in the short chute on the south end on the first pass through that area. And there was one year we put that on and we realized, I mean, that's really screwing things up because everybody knows. So we kind of degraded the system a little, but the day of somebody carrying the car, jumping in another car at the last minute and making it go faster than they'd ever gone before, that kind of all went away with this whole spread of technology. So they're so equal and everything. And I think we kind of screwed things up by was other guys doing it television then, but I really miss those qualifying days, and especially 4 days of qualifying and everything, and that's what pushed it out to be 30 days in May. But I like the qualifying now after a couple of years of having to put up with it.
Well, it had some excitement to it.
And this year they've expanded the Fast 9 shootout to 12 cars now, and I think that's going to create even better drama for for the viewers to watch that.
Well, and the thing they did for NBC that we never had, we tried to get them to do it, but under the format that we were working with, they couldn't. They've set that whole schedule in a way that it can always be covered by the network. On, like bump day, we'd go off the air at 6, and there might be a car on the track at 6 just rolling out, and a potential bump into the field. And so I was glad to see them get the television lined up so they can actually do good coverage of it.
Right, cover the whole thing, entire thing. Yeah. Absolutely.
You're not gonna worm out of this. And a little later, as we sign off, we're gonna each have to give our pick who be the poll winner.
Wait a minute.
So just be thinking about that.
I'm going to tell you right now, Mr. Holman, when asked that question.
Oh, I know that Mr. Holman winning, but this is about the poll winner, not the
No, I'm talking about when he was asked the question, like who's going to be on the poll, he'd look at you very seriously and say, well, that's why we run the whole thing. So we'll try that.
One last thing about the poll. It was, Bob, you're absolutely right, how prestigious it was. In 1960, when Eddie Sachs wins the poll, filmmaker Robert Drew, very talented, did the famous Hubert Humphrey Wisconsin primary documentary, came to do what was called On the Poll, and it was so successful. It ran with CBS's Summer Spectacular. They did it the following year for an hour in color. And of course, Sachs ate that up, on television for 2 consecutive years. So, Bob, one of the features that we like about this is to try to let our viewers send in a comment or a question. They can send it to speedwayinsiders@gmail.com. I think you got a couple in. You want to share what some of the viewers wanted to talk about this week?
Yeah, sure. We got a note from Michael Hudgens. Just wanted some remarks about Bob Jenkins, late great Bob Jenkins, and then another individual, Greg Gantz, asked us to speak in some detail at some point about Ed Elysian, very controversial, I think, complex individual. I know we don't have much time here left, but possibly Paul might share a little bit about Bob Jenkins.
Bob Jenkins was my best friend. We started loving racing together before either of us had any real belief we'd ever end up there. We both worked. I worked at WIBC and Bob worked at WIRE, and we'd call one another and talk about racing. And then ESPN came along. It wasn't even on the air yet. And I get a call from one of the ESPN producers. Now I'm working for NBC, and he says, I know you're exclusive as an announcer, but you're not as a producer. So would you put this race together at Eldora? It's going to be our first race. And, okay. So they said, you got to hire a talent. So I called Bob immediately and said, we got to do this. And then I called Larry Newber, and Bob comes and kind of slyly says, what is this, Paul? What's going on here? Again, it's not on the air yet. Nobody knows anything about it.
Right.
So I answer him by saying, well, Bob, it's a 24-hour sports channel. It's never going to last. Bob would remind me of that quite often. But I love that gentleman. I loved his delivery. I especially loved one of the last seasons that I did, when they put Bob in the booth as a host, and I've got Scott Goodyear alongside with me, and that was such a beautiful combination. And Bob, I'm telling you, NASCAR ought to be building a shrine to him too, because I think he and Benny Parsons actually helped bring NASCAR to the forefront. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But we're missing a lot by missing Bob. We really are.
Great guy.
They're doing, and I guess you can still do money on it. They're going to do in Liberty, Indiana, which is his hometown. They're going do a mural of Bob, and they've been soliciting some money to do that. So you want to get in on that, I guess you're probably going to get your name or something somewhere. Who knows? But
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
that's nice they're doing that.
Yeah, and my golly, Ed Elysian, maybe we'll do pretty much a whole show on him in 1958 one time. A poor troubled soul.
Yes.
Had gambling issues. He was a kind of a surly type of individual around most people. I think probably a lot of it had to do with just his financial situation that he was self-inflicted. Don Benford told me that he had the addiction of gambling and he could never win. He would keep playing until he lost everything and couldn't walk away from it. Benford, A.J. Watson, a couple others put together a collection of monies to bail out his gambling debts, and they would pay him back. And they thought, maybe this is a dangerous business. We should get an insurance policy on Ed just to cover our thing. And then he had that tragic accident in August of 1959 at Milwaukee where he burns to death. And it was something that shouldn't have happened. The car just barely tips over, but it got over and Ed couldn't get out, but it was minor. And then a trickle of fuel came out and hit the exhaust, and it caught fire. And someone told me that fireman hit it with an axe too accidentally, and that split the fuel tank even more so. But very, very interesting character. And if you guys are okay with it, we'll do a lot more on Ed Elysian in the future, and the good question that the guy brought in. So, but now, like I said, you've had a few minutes now to think who you're going to win the poll. We'll start with you, Bob. Who's your pick?
You mean I have to go before the real expert?
Well, we flipped the coin and it said Gates. So,
it's almost impossible, especially at this point where they really haven't started practicing yet.
That's the reason I asked that question. It makes it more
name out.
like.
I think you have to keep in mind the ones that are typically there. Scott Dixon, Will Power. I think Colton Herta this year. To pull one name out of the hat at this point, just very, very hard to do. But I think it's going to be among those that you typically see, running in those top nine.
Pick your pick, Bob.
And then with some of the newer guys coming along, we'll probably see some upsets there as well.
But you didn't give us a pick yet, so
no.
Since you mentioned Dixon first, we must assume that that's who you subconsciously think will win again. How about you, Paul? Do you?
Well, I think Power has really been there all season. Middle and fight. I mean, he's got his spirit back, so that would be one. And I'll get you down to one. Colton Herta, they're just coming off that great win. They're all enthused. He's enthused. That might carry through to a poll, but there's always that when you're on that high and then something goes wrong and you can't figure it out, then that blows you out of the water. And I think that Award might be the guy. Now, you can mess around with those three and figure out what you want, but I'm going with Colton Herta.
And this is really out on the limb, but for the last couple of years, he's ran particularly strong going into poll day, Connor Daly.
Mm-hmm. And he performed well Saturday.
And then would drop off on qualifying. I see Connor Daly winning the poll, and if he's not, his teammate Rinus VK, who started third last year. Ed Carpenter's teams tend to run always In fact, I would not be surprised those two run faster than their boss. But if Ed wins, he becomes a four-time pool winner Saturday. So any final thoughts, Mr. Gates, leading up to pool day?
No, I'm really looking forward to the month of May, although the rest of the month of May, let's call it that. A lot of new guys coming along, as we talked about. You got the old guys there with that experience that helped Castroneves get forward last year. So I think it's going to be a very exciting, not only qualifying day, but race day as well.
And Paul?
Pretty much echo Bob. That we're going to get the full crowd. We don't have any restrictions on crowd or anything, and they got some great entertainment in the infield and in the new snake pit going, and I like all of that. I like the tradition, and I'm so looking forward to getting out to the track to practice, watch them practice today.
I can hardly wait. Next episode, we've highlighted AJ Foyt's 4 wins. We've highlighted Al Unser's 4 wins. This coming episode, we will look into Rick Mears and his 4 wins. And for our viewers, we appreciate it. Again, what is the magic thing? Bob Gates, you remember? Where do they email? Speedwayinsiders@gmail.com.
I better remember that myself then.
We appreciate the comments on that. We'll see you next week. Will even be a more dynamic show as we will know a poll winner, and
Right.
we will have a much better feel on what this running will take shape. So for Paul Page and Bob Gates, this is Denny Miller, and thank you for viewing Indy 500 Yesteryear and Today. See you next week.